Since 2015, Jared Stillman has rocked Nashville sports.
That team freaking stinks.
And now he's back. The takes are hotter than ever.
I mean, let's be honest, he just can't coach.
Welcome to Stillman and Company.
Stillman and Company on the 440 Sports Network. We, of course, are presented by Hiller Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, and Electrical. Loaded show today. Tomorrow, I will be on the practice field at Vanderbilt Football Health Center, whatever the hell it's called now. The Titans practice facility, I will be out there. Our show will technically be at 2 o'clock, or maybe it'll be at 2:15, somewhere around that. You know, after practice is over, I'll do a recap of what I saw at practice throughout the whole day. So I'm excited about that. And I am going to want to get into that college sports bill tomorrow a little bit, just because I was reading through it today and we've got a loaded show. So I kind of want to save all of my thoughts on that, but we got a lot to get into today. Speaking of college, Greg Sankey said something that I'm sorry, it just doesn't work out. I now have a rooting interest in the NBA playoffs. I'll explain all of that. Plus AJ Brown to Jacksonville. That will come up today on the program. And of course, the Jaxson Dart story, and there's a little bit more news to get into. First, though, I do want to tell you about our presenting sponsor, Hiller Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, and Electrical. I love Hiller. They take great care of my home. They can do the exact same for you. Hiller has been taking care of my home for years. I bought my first home in 2018. And when I bought my first home in 2018, I didn't know anything about HVAC, plumbing, electrical. I didn't know anything about anything. And so when I bought my first home, they at the radio station at the time said, hey, Hiller would love to partner with you. I said, sure. And thank God they did, because for all the things that I don't know, Hiller has been there every step of the way, through moves, through all kinds of stuff. I'm a member of the Happy Hiller Club, so that means we have Hiller come out to the home and they do an inspection on the HVAC unit before it's 97 degrees. That's right. You don't want your HVAC going out. Be like me. Join the Happy Hiller Club today. That's Hiller Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, and Electrical. Proud supporters of the Preds, the Vols, and Vandy. That is Hiller. Call the Happy Face Truck today. And I do just want to let everybody in on something that's going to happen for this program going forward. So when I decided to go the pod route with Braden, and if you remember the way it all went down last year, the radio station decided in July, or I guess on July 31st, that they wanted to get their lineup out there for football. And what was really tough for me was that I was doing SiriusXM pretty much every single day during the summer, on top of doing my own 4-hour radio show. So it wasn't like I had the opportunity to say, okay, our contract negotiations are going to come to an end, so here's going to be where we go next. And so everything happened very quickly. And then I was on SiriusXM the next morning and the next weekend and the next week. And I was in New York and whatever. But the reason I bring that up is because when Braden and I struck an agreement, I said to Braden, I said, look, one thing that has happened over the years is I have been sitting there doing my show, and I look outside during the summer when the Titans are on their break and hockey season couldn't be further away, and the NBA and the NHL have wrapped up. And yeah, there's some baseball, but nobody here in Nashville cares about that. And I would just look outside and I would see a beautiful sunny day. And when I was doing 4 hours every day on the radio, I'd see that beautiful sunny day. And sure, I could maybe do something in the morning, like I could go on a walk in the morning, or but I had to prepare to do a 4-hour show. And then I did a 4-hour show. Last year, I was doing 4 hours and 15 minutes because I was doing the last segment of the midday show every day. And I would see that beautiful summer weather, and I would think, oh, God, I wish I could be out on the boat today. Oh, God, I wish I could be out there. Oh, God, I wish I could. And I used to be jealous of the columnists in town and the beat reporters and everything else, because they would just pretty much have the summer off. I'd have to fill 4 hours every day. Doesn't matter if it's July or if it's October and the Titans just played a game. It's 4 hours. And so when I talked with Braden about doing this, I said, look, I'm going to take some time off during the summer. And so starting next week, we're going to drop it down to 3 pods a week in June and July. And that does not include the vacation time that I'm going to take, where I actually am gone for a period of time. So I hope you don't look at that and say, well, shit, this is my daily show every single day. What am I going to do? I would just say, hey, go listen to the show that happened yesterday, because I promise you there's not going to be that much that changes over the course of the summer. And of course, whenever there is breaking news, i.e. the Predators hire a general manager, somebody randomly gets fired, whatever it may be, I'll be there. Whenever there's a big time breaking news, whatever, I will be there and I will be live. And that's why I want everybody to like and subscribe. Give us 5 stars on the app that you're listening to the podcast. Get us in those algorithms, so on and so forth. I also want to do a mailbag. And I was like, how do I do this? Should I do it on Twitter and say, hey, questions for the mailbag? So here's what I'm going to do. On Fridays, we're going to have a mailbag session. And what I'd like you throughout the course of the week to put those in the comment section. So if you've got a mailbag question, not the live chat during the show, but the comment section, and I say we'll hit about 3 or 4 tomorrow. So leave a mailbag question or a mailbag comment, and we will hit that as part of the weekly mailbag, which we will start doing on Fridays, and we will start doing it tomorrow. And we'll do that after we cover Titans OTAs. Okay. The first topic, Jaxson Dart and the Giants. This morning, it was reported, Mike Garafolo, NFL Network, quote, Giants quarterback Jaxson Dart addressed teammates in a meeting yesterday to discuss his introduction of President Trump last week, sources tell me and Ian Rappaport. Other team leaders spoke up as well, and Dart and the players worked through it. They are moving forward. And I saw another report that said Brian Burns got up and spoke. Kayvon Thibodeau got up and spoke. Jameis Winston, yes, he is still the backup there in New York. Jameis Winston got up there and spoke. And as soon as I saw the Garafolo tweet, what got me about this story is I looked at the tweets responding to the Garafolo tweet. The first tweet called Trump a racist. The second tweet said, quote, fuck the NFL office, fuck the media, and fuck libtard outrage. And I'm like, this story has brought out the worst in a lot of people. You know what's crazy about politics? For some reason, everybody has an opinion, and that's fine. And everybody has a way to express their opinion. It's called voting. But when it comes to politics, I would love to know which percentage of the population exists that just has to react to everything and has to throw a pissy fit about anything that isn't their politics. And I'm talking about the people on the far right and the people on the far left, because I don't feel like any story that comes across my aura, I just got to sit there and say, oh my God, let's talk about, we got to spend all day bitching about this. Oh my God, Saquon Barkley went and played golf with the president. Oh my God. Even when I had Jason Aldean on Sirius XM a couple weeks ago, first of all, let me say this about Jason Aldean. Jason Aldean is cool as shit. Like, I want everybody to know that. If you've never met Jason Aldean, he is a cool fucking dude. And he's a lot like me and you in the way that we love sports and our teams and everything else. And so I had Jason Aldean on Sirius XM. And look, I know there was that whole dust up with Aldean years ago about the song and the video and everything else. And Aldean's wife, had whatever. Who cares? But over the last couple of years, I've gotten to know Aldean a little bit. We'd see each other at shows because Lindsay works him. And then, of course, he and I sat down on Sirius XM for a sit down a couple weeks ago. He's a cool dude. And who gives a shit how he votes? And yet on social media, everybody was like, why do you have to have this guy? Oh my God, because he's one of the best country artists in the world. That's why. Because he's a cool dude. And I don't care who he voted for. And I don't want to speak for Aldean, but I don't think Aldean cares who I voted for. But what I've noticed is there's a certain percentage out there that no matter what the topic line is or the storyline is, it's got to be like, fuck the other side every time. And that is the problem. And that really is not Jaxson Dart's fault. He didn't create that. But he has to be aware that is unfortunately how society is. I want to be very, very clear about something. This story, Jaxson Dart introducing President Trump and the New York Giants having to have a team meeting and Abdul Carter saying what he said, and he shouldn't have said it. Let me say this. I said it on Whitlock's show, and I'm going to say it here. Abdul Carter, if he's got a problem with Jaxson Dart, he needs to take that up with Jaxson Dart. He needs to call Jaxson Dart. He doesn't need to go out on Twitter to make it a much bigger deal. But this story is not about politics. It's not about policies. It's not really about choices, i.e. left or right, Republican or Democrat. It's not about Trump. It's not about Biden. It's not about Ukraine, Iran, Israel. It's not about Ben Shapiro or Tucker Carlson or Rachel Maddow. The story to me is what's best for the New York Giants football team and what is best for their young, ascending, they hope he'll be a franchise quarterback. And what's best for the New York Giants football team is that everyone, especially the quarterback and the former number 3 overall pick, keeps their politics to themselves. And when I say that, people will say, well, Steph Curry and LeBron James didn't keep their politics to themselves. And this is like parenting. I don't care what somebody else's child did. For some reason, everybody thinks that whenever they're pushed into a corner of something they really don't want to admit. So what people say is they want to keep politics out of sports. But what that really means is I want to keep your politics out of sports. My politics are fine. What happens when somebody who has your politics is in sports, that person that gets mad then turns around and says, what about Steph Curry? What about LeBron James? What about Colin Kaepernick? I mean, people said to me the other day on social media, they were like, if this was a Democratic president, this wouldn't be a big deal, which might be true. I don't know, but there's no way to know that. There's no way to know that. I think what Steph Curry and LeBron James do is bad for business. I think Colin Kaepernick could have been a backup quarterback in the NFL after he was terrible and losing his job to Blaine Gabbert in San Francisco if Colin Kaepernick didn't make everything a social discussion. And so when no team in the NFL wanted to sign Colin Kaepernick, I was one of the people supporting that. And oh my God, the Jamel Hills of the world would never shut the fuck up. Anytime a quarterback played poorly or there was a backup quarterback that was in there, like, and I'm just throwing out a random name, Drew Lock. Well, Drew Lock's going to play quarterback, and every time the Colin Kaepernick fans would be like, Colin Kaepernick's better than Drew Lock. Yes, but what happens with Drew Lock, a backup quarterback, is when he has to play, he plays. And then when he doesn't have to play, he goes away. And that's what teams want out of their backup quarterbacks. What they don't want is they don't want somebody shot in Chicago, and now here comes the media with their cameras into the locker room, and let's all go talk to Colin Kaepernick, who's going to go host an episode of MSNBC. That's what they don't want. And I wouldn't want that if I was running a football team either, because it is a distraction. The fact that the Giants had to have a team meeting today proves the fact that what Jaxson Dart did led to a distraction. I'm sorry if this angers you in the political world, but where I come from, a football team should focus on football. And I do not get why that is such a controversial take. Boomer Esiason, Jason Whitlock, it's almost like they're scapegoating Abdul Carter because their policies align with that of Jaxson Dart's. And that's fine. But it's a disingenuous argument to make it all about the guy who called out the other guy when, again, none of that happens if the quarterback does what all the other quarterbacks do, Peyton Manning, Eli Manning, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, and stayed out of it. Again, I want my football team's focus to be on football. That's why it was such a red flag when they had the Manning Academy show with Anthony Richardson and Hendon Hooker and Will Levis. And Will Levis's question, when he had the opportunity to ask Peyton and Eli a question, was about marketing. And it was almost like, oh my God. Do you ever worry about football? Can you worry about football? So when Mike Garafolo puts it out there, and he wasn't the only one, ESPN had a story, and everybody, the Giants let everybody know that Jaxson Dart got up there and addressed his teammates. Now, it didn't say in any of the things I saw, it didn't say that Jaxson Dart apologized to his teammates, and I don't know if he did or if he didn't. But the lesson here for me, for everybody else, is stop worrying about your own politics and stop worrying about everybody else's. When it comes to football, let's just worry about football. And I don't think it's such a controversial take. And yet politics in America, I don't think, has ever been this divisive. Now, I say that we did have a civil war, so maybe I'm wrong. But politics in America in my lifetime has never been this divisive. Bush and Gore was intense, and it went to the wire. And yet, I'm not sure that after it all happened, I just don't remember people getting in their panties about everything when it came to Bush and Gore. And you might not like that. I don't like that. But it is how it is. And I think you have two choices in life when it comes to this. You can pick a side and stand by that side no matter what, which I think has led to some really, really stupid decisions and opinions. Or you could just stay out of it. And I'm just a guy who stays out of it. I have my own beliefs. What I don't do is I don't let everything become tribal where it's like, oh, I'm on this team or I'm on that team, because I think both teams fucking stink. But I've never understood this in politics, where it's become so rooted in ideology that it's like, all right, if you decide to play for the red team, you have to be against abortion. You have to want to lower taxes. You have to be pro-guns. You have to, and I'm thinking, what does somebody's opinion on foreign policy with Russia and Ukraine have to do with how they feel about abortion? I've never understood that. And yet that's where we're headed now. So to me, I'm like, I just stay out of it. And I think Jaxson Dart's probably learned his lesson on this. If he wants to be all about himself and he wants to be about his Instagram and feel popular and everything else, go play golf or tennis, where it's all about you. But the focus of the football team should always be on football. And before you tell me, but Jared, that was Jaxson Dart's free time, let me explain to you how the world works, folks. If you have that kind of position, i.e., that level of popularity, or you make the kind of money that those guys make, you don't really get free time away from the public. Tom Brady, in his first season as a starter, he went from being an absolute nobody to a superstar overnight. And the Super Bowl that year was in New Orleans, and Brady wanted to go out with his friends. So they went out on Bourbon Street. It was like 23, 24 at the time. And Brady got mobbed so badly that he came back to the hotel and he told his family, it's different for us now. Michael Jordan owns restaurants. And the reason that he owns restaurants in the cities he lives in is because Michael Jordan wants to go out to eat, but he can't just sit in the dining room of a TGI Fridays because he's Michael Jordan. I'll be willing to say that most of the people inside the Giants locker room don't really care about Jaxson Dart's beliefs or politics. I know I don't care about Jaxson Dart's beliefs or politics, but it is a distraction. If they have to have a team meeting, if they have to have a press conference, if they have all the cameras in there, it is a distraction. And for everybody who says it wasn't a big deal, it clearly was a big enough deal that Jaxson Dart had to get up in front of everybody and explain or apologize for what he did. And that's where the real homework now comes in for Jaxson Dart, because you're not going to get a lot of opportunities to prove this. And Will Levis, I think, is the perfect example of this. The real homework for Jaxson Dart is he needs to learn everything about the do's and don'ts of the quarterback position. Call Eli Manning. Eli Manning wasn't the best quarterback ever, but man, did Eli Manning know how business worked. Call Peyton Manning. Hell, call Ryan Tannehill. The do's and don'ts of the position. It's just like missing voluntary OTAs. If you're a receiver and you want to miss a couple of days, fine. If you're Justin Herbert, you're a bad teammate. Justin Herbert wants to go watch his girlfriend out in Europe. Justin Herbert, you haven't won a playoff game. You make $50 million a year. Get your ass to work. So that's the first topic. The second topic, what is going to happen to A.J. Brown? Now, for months and months and months, we have assumed the speculation has been rampant that A.J. Brown is going to go to the New England Patriots. And yet today, Ian Rappaport reported this morning the Patriots are not willing to give up a 2027 first-round pick for A.J. Brown, and thus the deal is, quote, not particularly close. Last week we heard that the Jacksonville Jaguars were preparing a push for A.J. Brown. So I have three thoughts on this. Number one, can A.J. Brown return to Philadelphia? Number two, how much is it going to tank the New England spirit if they don't get A.J. Brown, and the likelihood that the Patriots can repeat as AFC champions without A.J. Brown? And number three, is Jacksonville actually a serious player for A.J. Brown? June 1st is only 4 days away, which means it is heating up as to whether or not the New England Patriots are going to be able to make that trade for A.J. Brown that everybody assumed would happen after June 1st. Now, I want to go back to the beginning of this, which happened so long ago that a lot of the reporting came from Diana Rossini. That's how long ago it happened. I always thought that the reason the Eagles were willing to wait until after the draft to trade A.J. Brown was because they viewed a 2027 first as more valuable than a 2026 first. We were told that the 26 draft was a historically weak draft, and the Patriots held the 31st pick in it. So the likelihood is in the 27 draft, which is supposed to be a better draft, the Patriots pick will be better in the 20s instead of 31. And so there would be more value in a 27 first-round pick if the Eagles are willing to wait a year on cashing in their A.J. Brown chips. I didn't think it had to do with the cap and the splitting the cap hit over the 2 years and the bull crap that everybody else comes up with. But I did think when everything was happening with Vrabel, I'm like, this does create an opening where Philly can take advantage of them. So the first thing is, can A.J. Brown return to Philadelphia? If Philadelphia looks at their finances and they say, hey, we're prepared for A.J. Brown to play on this team for $29 million, and if they feel like A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni can all get along, if they were to bring A.J. Brown back, then Philadelphia has the ultimate leverage on New England in any negotiation, because at the end of the day, what Philadelphia can say is they can say, okay, fine, we'll just play with A.J. Brown at wide receiver. And only they know how much money they'll be able to spend if they can't trade A.J. Brown. And only they and A.J. know how the relationship between them is if he has to come back. Again, Jalen Hurts said that the relationship was great. Not sure I buy what Jalen Hurts is saying publicly about that right now. There are some situations, Keyshawn Johnson in Tampa Bay, where it is just so untenable that no matter what, it's not going to work. T.O. got to be that way in his career. If A.J. and the Eagles are guaranteed to split no matter what, then Philadelphia may not be able to get full value of the receiver that they're trading. because then you have to get rid of them, and that's when you make a deal. That's what a fire sale basically is. So that's the first question. Can A.J. Brown return to Philadelphia? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't think he can. But if he can, that gives the Eagles leverage, because the Eagles can then say, well, you know what? No deal is better than a bad deal. Number two, how much is this going to tank the New England Patriots' spirit if they don't get A.J. Brown? The New England Patriots got to the Super Bowl, and they were on cloud nine. Now, let's be real about the circumstances with how they got there. A historically easy schedule. They avoided all of the great quarterbacks in the AFC, and they got to play Denver's backup in the AFC Championship game. They got dog-walked in the Super Bowl by a team that was significantly better than them. And while they do have a young quarterback on the ascent, New England still has some work to do, and I think we all agree on that. So when it comes to the work they have to do, well, they have to help that young quarterback become a great quarterback. How do you do that? You get him a true number one receiver, A.J. Brown. So they cut Stephon Diggs, who last year, actually, according to PFF, had a better year than A.J. Brown. They cut Stephon Diggs at $22 million. They signed Romeo Doubs, who is no Stephon Diggs, and he's no A.J. Brown. And they didn't draft a receiver. They have a giant hole that's open at receiver that I guess Kayshon Boutte can play if he has to, but that hole is for A.J. Brown. There is a locker in Foxborough, I would assume, that is reserved for number 11, A.J. Brown. And then throw on the Vrabel bullshit on top of it. Mike Vrabel up there yesterday at the podium was deflecting and filibustering as well as I've ever seen him do it. He had a glisten to him. I think he was sweating a little bit because he was so nervous because he's normally allowed to be an asshole, and yesterday he couldn't be an asshole. So you're Mike Vrabel, and you've just dealt with the scandal of your lifetime, coming off of a Super Bowl appearance. Everybody in your city is behind you because they think you're a great coach and you can lead them to the promised land, but they're going to want to be led there. You've built the offseason around A.J. Brown. If you end up not getting A.J. Brown and you re-sign Stephon Diggs, which I don't think would happen, but that's an option. If you end up not getting A.J. Brown, and your wide receiving core is what it was last year, plus Romeo Doubs and Kayshon Boutte in A.J. Brown's place, a lot of people are going to look at you when you play Seattle in week 1, and they're going to say, what did you do to help out the young quarterback? There's already the big question mark of whether or not the 4th overall pick can play left tackle, or if they drafted his replacement at 31 so they can kick him into guard. But the entire New England Patriots offseason, I think, was really about two things. Number one, get Drake May a number 1 receiver. Number 2, sign Christian Gonzalez to an extension. Those are the two things I think that mattered before Vrabel and Rossini and that ever happened. And I just wonder if you're the Patriots and you're sitting there saying no on a 2027 first or no on a 2028 first. I wonder if you really can go back to your fan base and go back to your team after the offseason where you just went to the Super Bowl, where everybody was jazzed up about you acquiring A.J. Brown, and you can say, yeah, we're going to roll with Kayshon Boutte. But I don't know. Maybe Robert Kraft's cool with that. Maybe Vrabel's cool with that. Maybe Josh McDaniels is like, we don't need to trade a first-round pick. I mean, what are we doing? We'll just roll with Kayshon Boutte and Romeo Doubs. And then the third thing is Jacksonville a player for A.J. Brown, or is anybody else a player for A.J. Brown? Now, Robert Turpin, the old running back, longtime Seattle Seahawk, played in Indianapolis. Robert Turpin was on my SiriusXM show over the weekend. And I asked him, I said, what's going to happen with A.J. Brown? Where's A.J. Brown going to go? And he said to me, he goes, I don't think A.J. is going to New England. I said, what? He said, I think it's more likely that A.J. goes to Jacksonville or A.J. goes back to the Rams. Remember, there was some talk about the Rams and then they would trade Devontae Adams. So he thinks A.J. might go to the Rams and then they would then later deal Devontae Adams. I don't know how feasible that is, but Robert Turpin says Jacksonville, he thinks is the favorite. And he does not think he's going to end up in New England. Now, when it comes to A.J. Brown, you have to remember two things. Philly wants a first-round pick, and you have to pay him $29 million. Plus, I believe A.J. has something like $7 million guaranteed for next year. So if you're an NFL team, you give your general manager or your president of football operations, you give them a budget at the beginning of the year, and you say, this is how much money we can spend. So as of right now, according to Spot Track, the Dallas Cowboys, which this actually shocks me, the Dallas Cowboys have committed $374 million to their team. I don't know what Jerry set the budget at, but I'm guessing that Jerry doesn't have another $29 million in reserve that he feels comfortable spending on the football team this year. Same with Baltimore, who's number 3, or San Francisco, who's number 4. So when it comes to who's going to be able to take on the A.J. Brown money, at the bottom of the league right now, Miami, Atlanta, the Chargers, and then the Patriots. And I think the Patriots at $287 million, and again, this is according to Spot Track, the Patriots have factored in, hey, we're going to acquire A.J. Brown at roughly $30 million, and that's going to take us to about $315 million or so, which would put us around the 20th payroll in the NFL. That's why I don't think the Chiefs have interest, because they're at $329 million. I don't think they have another $29 million in the reserves to go up and try to get A.J. Brown. So how many teams out there have the money laying around to be able to do this? And then how many teams out there would also be willing to trade a first-round pick for it? And I just don't know if that team exists. The only reason I'm willing to entertain the idea of Jacksonville is because Jacksonville right now has $324 million in cash committed to their team. Last year, Jacksonville was the highest spender at $351 million. So that's roughly a difference of $30 million, which is roughly what AJ would be. Jacksonville has shown they're willing to trade first-round draft choices. They did it in order to go up and get Travis Hunter, and Travis Hunter is not going to play receiver for them. There have also been all the rumors about Brian Thomas. So if I'm Jacksonville, I maybe trade A.J. Brown, give up a first, and then trade Brian Thomas and pick up a first. I've actually always liked Brian Thomas, and I'm surprised that it hasn't worked out with Liam Cohen in Jacksonville. But I do wonder how serious of a contender Jacksonville actually is for A.J. Brown. And if Jacksonville does want A.J. Brown, and if Shad Khan is willing to pay the money, and if James Gladstone looks at it and says, we were right there with Buffalo in the wild card last year, we went on the road to Denver and beat the crap out of them, add A.J. Brown into the mix, keep him from New England, we're an AFC contender, period. Maybe they do it. But there's a part of me that wonders, are the Patriots bidding against themselves here? Because, again, I don't know who is good enough to acquire A.J. Brown, because A.J. is going to have a say in this too, and who's going to be willing to pay the money for you to acquire A.J. Brown. But again, that's the three things that we got to figure out. Can A.J. return to Philly? If he can, and Jeffrey Lurie is okay with the fact that right now, if you look at the cash spending in the NFL, the number one team is Philadelphia, and it is not particularly close. Philadelphia at $391 million is number one. They're trying to subtract $29 million from that. Did Jeffrey Lurie say, hey, you know what? $391 million is fine by me. We'll have the number one payroll in the league? I don't know. Can New England afford what it'll be like if they don't get A.J. Brown? I don't know. And then number three, is Jacksonville or anybody else a real player when it comes to A.J. Brown? That's our second topic. Our third topic comes from the SEC. Commissioner Greg Sankey. Now, look, there's that whole bipartisan bill. Ted Cruz, some other woman, they've come up with a bipartisan bill to save college athletics. I'm going to dive into that, I think, tomorrow, because I read it, but I'm not sure I totally understand it. I want to make sure I understand it to see if it actually has any possibility of passing and being enacted. But right now, it's posturing season, the league meetings. And the SEC is having their league meetings in Destin, Florida. And the SEC, who for years and years and years has said it just means more is really struggling to cope with the reality that the Big Ten right now has dominated them in their sport, football. Greg Sankey, speaking in Destin, this is according to ESPN, said, quote, "If you look at the entirety of our league, we are by far the most competitive, the strongest football league by far," Sankey told reporters following the second full day of the SEC spring meetings. "But if you're going to lose games when it's close and competitive like that, so why have they surpassed us? It's an odd ball. It bounced a couple of times the wrong way." Greg. When a reporter asked why the Big Ten has moved past the SEC in football performance in the CFP, Sankey didn't bristle at the question, but was ready with a response. He pointed out that Michigan beat Alabama 27-20 in overtime in the 2024 semifinal at the Rose Bowl, and quickly broke down Ohio State's 28-14 CFP semifinal win over Texas in the Cotton Bowl. He also recounted Miami's thrilling win against Ole Miss this past season in the Fiesta Bowl when the Rebels fell short after a last-second pass in the end zone was incomplete. Greg Sankey has resorted to loser talk. That's what Eric Dickerson said when Jeff Fisher was the coach of the Rams, and they used to say, "Oh, if this hadn't happened, if we had had another quarter," and Eric Dickerson said, "That's what losers say." Well, you know, the 2024 Rose Bowl game was an overtime game that we lost. The SEC has not been in the national championship game in 3 years. That's a problem. The Big Ten has won 3 straight national titles. And if you want to say, okay, well, on one hand, you know, Michigan, very good in 23, and they cheated. Ohio State, there's no shame in losing to Ohio State. You know, it's one thing to lose to Scarbini State. It's another thing to lose to Ohio State. So Ohio State, got to give them 2024. Indiana beat Michigan last year. Indiana. And I said Michigan, I mean Alabama. Indiana, for Christ's sakes, beat Alabama 38-3. Well, you know, if you look at it, when Ole Miss and Miami went right down to the wire, and 38-3 Indiana over Alabama in the Rose Bowl. At some point, Greg, it is what it is. Well, Alabama played Michigan close in the Rose Bowl in 2023. That's what losers say. I'm sorry, Alabama shouldn't have even made it to the college football playoff that year. The only reason they did was because of the SEC Nick Saban bias when Florida State was undefeated. That's the only reason why. Holy Kopi. I mean, it's just, I don't understand it. Why does Sankey have to get up there and say the SEC is better than the Big Ten when the Big Ten's won 3 straight titles? And Sankey has to bring in the loser talk of, well, the ball didn't bounce our way. Fine. 1 year? Okay, I can live with that. Again, in 2023, so this was the 24 playoff, but in the 23 football season, Alabama lost in overtime in a 14 playoff. Fine. Understood. They didn't make the national championship game that year. They didn't make the national championship game the next year. That was Notre Dame and Georgia. Notre Dame and Ohio State. They didn't make the national championship game the next year. That was Miami from the ACC, who can barely pay its bills, and Indiana. The Big Ten has surpassed the SEC. And a year ago, I was doing a show for College Sports Radio at CMA Fest with Caroline Fenton and Chris Childers. And Chris Childers is a good friend of mine, and he's on the SiriusXM College channel. And Childers said the SEC's dominance is over and Sankey knows it. And this was a year ago. And I was in total denial of that. Look, the Big Ten won 2 titles. That's fine. But the SEC's not going anywhere. I didn't think Georgia was going anywhere. I didn't think LSU, who had spent all that money on their team, was going to go anywhere. I didn't think Alabama was going to get drubbed by Florida State the way they did to begin the season. I thought Alabama, even under Kalen DeBoer, I thought they still had a chance. Texas was preseason number 1. Arch Manning, all that money they spent on the team. And yet, the SEC couldn't even get to the championship game. And their flagship program, Alabama, got drubbed by Indiana. So how exactly does it mean more? The SEC loves that. They love to pump their chest. And they love to say, it just means more. But how? They're not spending more money on their football teams than the Big Ten. They're not better in basketball than the Big Ten. They can't even make the national championship game in football anymore. So I need somebody to explain to me, how does it mean more? Or when we say it just means more, I thought that meant it just means more to the fans, the boosters, the university, the players, and it shows in the trophy case. Now it seems like when you say it just means more, it just tells you, well, our callers to the Paul Feinbaum show call louder than other people's callers. I grew up in SEC country. I love the SEC, even though I didn't go to an SEC school. And I thought it was laughable, even with Larry Ellison backing Michigan and Mark Cuban backing Indiana and everybody. I thought it was crazy to think that the Big Ten could pass the SEC. But it is what it is. And for Greg Sankey to put it out there that he still thinks the SEC is the best football conference in America is A, factually inaccurate, B, disingenuous at best, and C, a desperate attempt to cling to a reality that doesn't exist anymore. I do want to hit on the basketball, if I may, for a second. So I have a huge rooting interest in Game 6 of the Western Conference Final tonight. And I'm not from San Antonio. I'm not from Oklahoma City. You all know that. But my rooting interest is in defending a take that I had over the weekend. So, when it comes to the NBA, I actually have gotten back into basketball this year, or at least I'm way more into basketball this year than I was last year, and really that I was since any time post Kevin Durant going to Golden State. And I know that the Knicks await whoever wins this slugfest between two heavyweights, San Antonio and OKC, two stars, SGA and Wembanyama, and I'm ready for that. But I'm rooting for OKC to close it out tonight in Game 6. And I am rooting for OKC to win the NBA Finals. And I'll tell you why. Over the weekend, I was preparing for a show on SiriusXM. And I was building a topic around SGA after Game 3 of the Spurs-Thunder series. And the reality with SGA is SGA is the most boring NBA superstar in my lifetime. And when I say boring superstar, I mean a superstar. I'm not talking about Grant Hill, okay? I'm talking about a superstar. I was born in 89. So the superstars in my lifetime, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, Tim Duncan, Allen Iverson, LeBron James, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant. If you want to throw Hakeem Olajuwon in there, you can. And SGA. And Wembanyama is coming. I understand that. And of that group, again, Larry, Magic, Michael, Kobe, Shaq, Duncan, AI, LeBron, Steph, Durant, Hakeem. SGA is by far the most boring of the group. Now, some people will say it's because he's from Canada. Well, he's not an American superstar. I don't necessarily buy that. And the reason I don't buy that is because Shohei Ohtani is from Japan, and he's still box office. Mike Trout, now he's always hurt, but Mike Trout, who cares? Shohei Ohtani, box office. So where you're from doesn't necessarily define if you're boring or not. SGA just doesn't have Michael or Kobe's personality. He doesn't dunk like Jordan. He hasn't revolutionized the game like Steph Curry. He's not a freak like LeBron James or Victor Wembanyama. But if you look at the stats and the accomplishments, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is on a Michael Jordan-like run. If you're watching the stream, you'll see I put these stats up. These are from their age 23 seasons to their age 27 seasons, which is where SGA is now. And over that 4-year period, Michael Jordan averaged 34 points a game. SGA averages 30. Michael averages 6 rebounds a game. SGA averages 5. Michael and SGA both averaged 6.1 assists per game. Now, Jordan almost doubled him up in steals, and Jordan was a better defensive player than SGA. SGA 1.6 steals per game to Jordan's 2.9. Jordan 1.1 blocks per game, SGA 0.9, basically the same. SGA was a better three-point shooter than Jordan. SGA is about 35% from three. Jordan was 30. And SGA is a better free throw shooter than Michael Jordan. As far as the accomplishments were concerned, again, this is age 23 to age 27, which is how old SGA is now. They both won 1 title. Jordan 5 first-team All-NBAs, SGA 4. They both won 2 MVPs. They both won a Finals MVP. Jordan went to 5 All-Star games. SGA went to 4. The difference, though, Jordan did have a Defensive Player of the Year in there and was an All-NBA defensive player. So Jordan was the better player, but not by a lot. And that's where I have found interest in OKC and where I am now rooting for OKC. Here's a stat that I was unaware of. This came from Zach Karam from ESPN.com, who was on my SiriusXM show over the weekend. If SGA wins the finals and is finals MVP, which he most likely would be, he is the engine of that OKC team, then SGA will be one of 3 players in the history of the NBA who in a 2-year period have won 2 MVPs, 2 championships, and 2 final MVPs. You want to guess the other 2? Michael Jordan and LeBron James. Again, when I bring up these guys, Steph, LeBron, Magic, Larry, Michael, Kobe, Tim Duncan, I think many of you don't believe SGA belongs there. But as of right now, SGA is on an MJ-like run. Now, they have to win the finals this year, which there's no guarantee they will, though I think that they are the favorite to do it. And then they have to contend with Wembanyama, and SGA has to go win 4 more championships, which is going to be hard as hell with the way Wembanyama is coming along. If Wembanyama adds 20 pounds over the next 2 years, he may be one of the greatest players to ever play. But I love greatness. I love Jordan. And I'm not here to tell you SGA is going to be Jordan because, again, you're asking SGA to multiply his championship output if they win this year by 3 in order to match Jordan. And he's got to keep winning the MVP. And he's got to keep being up there for scoring titles and scoring 30 a game, which is going to be harder to do the older he gets. And he's got to go beat Wembanyama, who is on the ascent, the way Ewing and the Knicks were on the ascent once Jordan started winning his titles. And then later, Reggie and the Pacers were on the ascent. But that's what the greats do. Well, there are all these other college coaches that were on the ascent over the years in college football. Didn't stop Nick Saban from competing. So I root for greatness, and thus I'm rooting for SGA. And even though SGA and OKC are kind of boring, I do think the more they win, especially if they play the Knicks in the finals, and the more that these graphics, where you can compare them to Michael Jordan's Bulls or Kobe Bryant, I do feel like the more that happens, the more there is a possibility that OKC is going to be one of those can't-miss teams. And that SGA is going to become this huge polarizing superstar because that's the world we live in. where it's like, well, who cares about SGA? Well, SGA is on a run right now that's as good as Michael Jordan. In fact, SGA won his first title a year younger than Michael Jordan, won his first of 2 MVPs before Michael Jordan. And people say, how dare you bring up Michael Jeffrey Jordan's name into this? Because that's how we are with Jordan. I love Jordan, but everybody's protective of Jordan. How dare you bring up Michael Jeffrey Jordan or Kobe Bean Bryant into any of this, Jared? And if SGA keeps winning, that's what's going to happen. And when that happens, then people are going to get supercharged, and it's going to be like a mini version of LeBron versus Michael and those debates. And I'm kind of rooting for that because that's what the NBA is about. In the NFL, yes, we have Tom Brady, and Tom Brady won 7 Super Bowls, so it's hard to think anybody's ever going to compare to Brady. But for the most part, even when Brady was on his run of becoming the greatest player ever, it wasn't like there was this daily discussion of Brady versus Montana. The NFL, we don't hold on to the leather helmet guys and try to compare them with the current day players today. Nobody ever talks about when a quarterback is ascending that, how does he compare to Roger Staubach? Boy, this great running back, does he compare to Barry Sanders or O.J. Simpson or Tony Dorsett? Or we don't do that. The rules are so different. The stats are so different now. There's more games. There's more. But yet in basketball, it's all about competing against the ghost of the 90s. And I would like SGA to enter the conversation. And before you sit there and you tell me SGA gets all the foul calls, Jared, so does every star. So did Jordan. So did Kobe. Nobody ever remembers that Tyrese Halliburton tore his Achilles in Game 7. They'll just remember that SGA was a 2-time MVP and won the championship and might win it again. And I do think that if SGA goes through the Knicks, because the New York Knicks are so popular amongst people who talk about the NBA on television, I think there is a legitimate chance that SGA and OKC, that they become villains. When right now I feel like most people are kind of neutral on both. But that's why I'm rooting for Oklahoma City. I am rooting for the take. That I pulled up the stats, compared Michael, compared SGA, and I was kind of stunned how it really does feel like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is on a Michael Jordan pace. Again, it's a Michael Jordan pace that I think is really, 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 really hard to keep up with. I mean, he'd basically have to win the next 4 finals or take a 2-year sabbatical somewhere there in between. But the numbers are the numbers, and he and Michael are very, very close. Tomorrow, I will be out at Titans OTAs. So tomorrow's show may be a little bit shorter. I think we're going to do a little mailbag, so drop in a comment. Ask a mailbag question. Maybe we'll try to do the mailbag tomorrow. I do want to talk about the new college sports bill, but I will be at the practice field, and practice ends at 1:15, and we go live at 2 o'clock. So I believe it'll be fresh off the practice field with the what went down. And here's what I care about at OTAs. Because I no longer have to do a 4-hour show where I have to make a mountain out of every single molehill, here's what matters to me. Number one, how does Cam Ward look? Because Cam Ward looked a lot of the same last week. I know he dropped the 10 pounds, and Jeremy Fowler says you might see Cam Ward run the ball more, and that's fine. But feet set, accuracy, ball placement, is he not throwing the ball 5 yards behind Wan'Dale Robinson like he did last week? I'm going to be keeping an eye on that. The second thing is, can Carnell Tate do it again? And what I mean by that is, when it comes to terrible, I mean, you can see terrible pretty much in one take, where we watch a guy, oh my God, he can't even dribble the basketball. He stinks. But when it comes to really, really good, the thing about the best players is they do it almost every week. That's what I want to see from Carnell Tate. I was so impressed with Carnell Tate in last week's Open OTA. Again, the ball just fit his hands like a catcher's mitt. It was like melting butter in his hands. It was beautiful. Is he going to do the same thing again? That's how you become Justin Jefferson. is that every time you turn on the TV, oh my God, there's another great play that's made by Justin Jefferson. And I was thinking about this, and I'm going to think more about this when I watch him tomorrow when it comes to Pickens. And I said, okay, who does Pickens remind me of? Or I said Pickens. Who does Carnell Tate remind me of? Right now, I think it might be George Pickens. Now, I don't know if he has Pickens' speed, but I think he's got Pickens' body type. And Pickens is a tactician with how he catches the ball. If Pickens wasn't a total crazy ass, if you weren't worried about his head coming unscrewed at any moment, George Pickens be a top 2-3 receiver in the NFL right now. And when I watch Carnell Tate, I think I see a little bit of George Pickens out there. So that's the one I'm going to roll with right now, is that's what I felt like I saw. And that's what I am hoping to see again tomorrow. What I would hate to see is I would hate to see Carnell Tate go out, ball out in the first OTA, and then go do nothing tomorrow. And then it's like, well, which guy is he? And I was even talking to Teron Davenport about this on the field at OTAs last week. And I said, hey, Carnell Tate has been impressive. He's pretty good. But I do remember the practice that Treylon Burks had his rookie year. Now, it wasn't the first practice he ever participated in, which gives me hope that Carnell Tate's going to do this tomorrow, and this is just who Carnell Tate is. But there was a training camp practice Treylon Burks had where I remember coming back and doing the show after that practice and telling Caroline, if that guy I saw at practice is on the Titans for 16 or 17 games this year, then they're going to be fine without A.J. Brown, because that's how good Treylon Burks looked in those practices. So let's hope that Carnell Tate just continues his great play from practice to practice and then takes it over in the games, where he's not like Treylon Burks or Chigakonkwo, who, again, are practice Hall of Famers. And finally, one last thing on the program today. It was announced yesterday that Mark Howard is being inducted into the Tennessee Radio Hall of Fame. I can't think of anybody who is more worthy for that honor than Mark Howard. I started listening to the Wake Up Zone when it launched, when I was in 7th or 8th grade, and I listened to Mark, Frank, and Kevin every morning. Those guys were on in the morning. The true story is I joined 102.5 in 2015. I originally got asked about joining 102.5 in 2013, and they wanted me to host the morning show alongside of Big Joe and Greg Pogue. They wanted me to play the Kevin Ingram role. And it didn't really go anywhere. It wasn't much of a discussion. But I remember thinking, like, I don't know if I can go to battle against Mark, Kevin, and Frank. And the chemistry that Mark had, where he and Frank would get into it, and Kevin was the perfect point guard for those guys, it was a great show. And when Mark Howard unceremoniously got left behind by 104.5, I went to Ryan Porth and I said, let's get Mark Howard on our pregame show. Mark Howard had been a staple for years on Titans Talkback and on the Titans pregame show. Let's go get Mark Howard. And we did. And for a year, I did the show with Mark and Chris Sanders, and Mark did the draft with us, and I got to know Mark Howard. And I wouldn't say Mark Howard and I were great friends. We would text back and forth sometimes about the Yankees or just sending a note to one another. We did shows together. We got to know each other. And I'll say, I kind of looked up to Mark Howard because Mark Howard was a legend as far as Titans fans were concerned, Nashville sports fans were concerned. He loved the Predators. Mark Howard knew, I mean, when he would do a show, he would have notes on notes on notes on notes compiled. He took this job seriously. And I was glad for the year and a half or so that I got to spend around Mark Howard. I got to know Mark Howard. I used to talk to Mark Howard all the time with questions about how things used to be and where they were headed and what he thought and everything else. I really liked Mark Howard. He was a really good man, and he freaking loved his son. Holy crap, did he love his son. And it's a shame that Mark is no longer with us. I remember when Chase texted me that Mark had passed away. I remember the gut punch I felt that day. And I talked about taking SSRIs last week on the show and how I take an SSRI every day. But the moment that I started taking SSRIs was around Mark Howard's death. That thing hit me hard because I guess maybe I looked at myself and maybe, and I felt a little Mark Howard in me. Mark didn't do this for the attention. Mark didn't do it for the money, though he probably made a lot of it at 104.5. Mark Howard did it because Mark Howard loved it. And that reminds me of me. And Mark Howard was a really good guy. And he was a great broadcaster. And he is as deserving as anybody could be in terms of entering the Tennessee Sports Hall of Fame. That's going to do it for us here on the program. What an honor for Mark and his family. And I just wanted to give a tip of the cap. That's going to do it for us. In fact, I actually have my swim trunks on. I'm going on the lake today. So like and subscribe. Tell your friends. I'll be fresh off the practice field tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Stillman and Company, 5 stars. We'll see you then, 440 Sports.